Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Happy Friday. We're pleased to have with us today Colonel Steve Warren from Operation Inherent Resolve, coming to us live from Baghdad. Steve, good morning, and you're missing all the snow here. We wanted to turn it over to you, and happy to see you.
Good morning, Jeff, and good morning to the 2 or 3 members of the press corps who made it in today. It's good to see that some of you at least were able to dig out of the snow. Here in Iraq, we enjoyed the social media show. I particularly liked all the pictures of yard furniture covered in white stuff and rulers sticking out of the snow. So if you tweeted one of those pictures, you were the only one. Trust me. I do want to cover a couple of things quickly. Over the last week, we've kept pressure on ISIL across the depth and breadth of the battlefield. What I've got for you today is a map that shows airstrike intensity. So please pull up map number 1, titled Coalition Airstrikes. This map shows the location and intensity of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria over a 1-month period, the last month, from July 1st through July 28th. As you can see, the concentrations were really in 3 broad areas: Mosul, the Anbar corridor, specifically Ramadi, and the Al-Raqqa area. Of note, we are also striking the lines of communication in and around these areas. 87% of these airstrikes are dynamic. The remainder are pre-planned. So with that, we'll go to the opener map, the Sajoa map. On the ground this week in Iraq, operations have focused on clearing in Ramadi, improving defensive positions in Sinjar, and patrolling in Beji. We've seen small dust-ups in both the Euphrates and Tigris River valleys, but no significant tactical actions. Please bring up the Ramadi map next. You'll notice that the Ramadi city center has now been cleared of enemy forces. The ISF are moving into the eastern suburbs. This past week, the Anbar police took over as the hold force in many areas, which allows the CTS to rest and refit for future operations. Please go back to the opener map. In Syria, we've seen much the same. Fighting along the Mara line continues to be contested as both forces conduct limited offensive operations. That's at star number 4, which is not on your map. It's in the upper left-hand corner of your map. While forces holding the Tishreen Dam improve their defensive positions. This map also depicts, we've tried to combine 2 things here, this map also depicts the territory that ISIL has lost and gained since August of 14. So what you can see there in green, in the green shade, is area that ISIL once held but now no longer controls. In the kind of brown, tan brown, is what this enemy still holds. The grayish area there is areas controlled by somebody other than ISIL. And then, of course, the white is just kind of sparsely populated desert. So this reflects our estimate that ISIL has lost approximately 40% of the territory it once held in Iraq, approximately 5% of the territory it once held in Syria. That's it for my operational update. I want to do a quick training update as well and tell you that the 72nd Iraqi Army Brigade is finishing up training in Besmaya. That training is led by the Spanish and the Portuguese contingents. This training was extended by about 6 weeks in order to include a new focus on obstacle breaching. I do have a short video to show that just kind of gives you an overview of what some of this training looks like in action. So with that, Divids, can you roll that one video, please? what I wanted to give you with that video is a taste of what the training is that we're conducting up in Besmaya. You saw several things there. And initially, that explosion, that was a MICLIC, a line charge used to breach obstacles. You later saw an Iraqi soldier firing an AT-4, an anti-tank shoulder-fired rocket or missile, which has been used to great effect against our enemy truck bombs. And then you saw the Iraqis conducting some room clearing operations. So that's it for my opening remarks, and without any further discussion, we'll turn it over to questions. If AP is there, I guess we'll start with you.
Hi Steve, it's Lita. Can you expand a little bit on your training information about how many Iraqi soldiers have gone through this advanced training? And as you look ahead to operations moving towards Heat and Mosul, is there a number that the coalition is looking to have trained before you actually have to start the major operations up there?
We've trained, right now we've trained about 20,000 total Iraqi security forces. That does include police, and it also includes the tribal fighters, the Sunni tribal fighters. So pretty good number. What we're doing now is in the process of building the force that will go to Mosul eventually. We're not really prepared to put out a number right now. We would think it'll be roughly 10 brigades, with anywhere from, about 2,000, sometimes 3,000. It depends on the brigade, how many people are in the brigade. So we think roughly ballpark of 10 brigades that need to be built. And these all have to be trained. Some of the brigades that will go to Mosul, we have already trained, but we want to touch them again. We want to give them some additional training that they can use to build on what they learned first through our training and second through their experiences in Ramadi. So that's kind of where we are right now.
The ones that you say have been trained, are any, and I guess maybe this 77nd, are any fully trained and prepared for Mosul, or are there none at this point, none of those brigades at this point would the coalition believe are fully trained for those advanced operations?
Well, we believe that all of the forces that we've already trained and run through Ramadi, for example, are certainly capable of moving to Mosul. But we have made a decision that we want to run them through another cycle of training. So are they trained? Yes. Could they go to Mosul now? Yes. But we would prefer to give them additional training before they go. And I think and this is our recommendation to the Iraqis. Of course, the Iraqis agree with us. So we're building the plan now as to how rapidly we can move these brigades through the training pipeline.
Jim from USA Today.
Hey, Colonel Warren, just a little follow on that. Of the 10 brigades that you need, and some of them will go through training again, others will get training from the start. Could you give some sense of the extent of those individual trainings? In other words, the brigades that haven't gone through yet, are they going to need several months of training, or what sort of timeline are we looking at?
Well, the training, our standard training is 8 weeks of training. Additionally, we've got things like commando school, sniper school, some medic training, things like that. But the standard block is 10 weeks. That may expand based on a specific unit that perhaps is earmarked to do a specific thing, may need some additional specific training. For example, if there's the unit that's going to be the first one to go across a bridge, let's just say, we'd want that unit to get some training on how to do that. So again, it's always going to vary, but the baseline is 8 weeks.
Follow on Ramadi, you mentioned that the on-bar police are starting to provide security, which is allowing the conventional forces and the counterterrorism forces to leave. Do you have a general sense of what percentage of the city the police is securing now?
Well, I hadn't looked at it that way, percentages. I can tell you that I think it's 6 of the CTS battalions have already withdrawn from Ramadi and been replaced by police. There's 3 CTS battalions remaining in Ramadi. So I don't have a percentage for you, Jim. I just haven't looked at it that way. But we are seeing the turnover begin to happen, specifically from the CTS. The Army, the conventional Army, they still haven't turned anything over yet to the police, but the CTS, the Counterterror Service, has. So really, it's majority Army at this point, with some neighborhoods, a handful of neighborhoods in control by the police. But the is the conventional Army.
Brian. Yes, within the past few weeks, B-1s left CENTCOM for the first time since 2001, and these were a huge part of the coalition air assets available. In fact, I think the last 6-month rotation of B-1s set a record for most bombs dropped during a rotation. Does this represent a loss in capability for the coalition, and are you aware of any plans to replace this capability of assets for the coalition?
Yeah, we have the airframes we need to conduct the operations that we want to conduct. As you know, 2 carrier strike groups have moved in over the last, I don't know, month or so. Additionally, there's other airframes that are scheduled to come in. We're not prepared to really announce exactly who and what that's going to be yet, but we're confident that we're not going to lose any capability.
Hey, Steve, it's Marcus. Those additional 10 brigades, have you looked at how many additional U.S. or coalition trainers are going to be needed to train them, and if you made any recommendations back here to Washington?
So the short answer to your question is no, we have not yet. We're in that process now of determining, and it's not so much about whether or not we can do it, it's how rapidly you can get them through, right? We can train all 10 with what we have, so then it becomes a question of, do you make the pipe a little bit bigger so that you can put more through the pipe faster? So that's what we're working on now, and that's working on several levels. Obviously, at the higher level, it's a matter of working with other partner nations to see what else they're able to contribute. For example, there's an additional 15 Italian carabinieri trainers due in here in the coming weeks. 15 may seem like a small number, but they're going to build to train police, and that's enough for them to be able to rapidly, increase the throughput of police that are getting trained. So we're doing the analysis to determine how rapidly we believe we can train with what we have on the ground, and then what enablers and what additional trainers could be requested, always through the government of Iraq, and how much that would allow us to increase our throughput.
Andrew.
Steve, can you tell me if General McFarland is having playing any role in the operations in Libya? I know he was the first guy to be to oversee both Iraq and Syria, and it's increasingly sounding like some operations in Libya are getting pretty similar against the same enemy. But that's AFRICOM. I'm just wondering how that's playing out for General McFarland.
As of now, it's not playing out at all. His focus is on Iraq and Syria.
Bill Hennigan.
Hey, Steve. So I was wondering what the expectations are out of this coming coalition meeting. I mean, are you going to go there with some explicit asks of these coalition partners and how they can step their game up, particularly with the B-1s going out of the AOR? I mean, do you want more coalition aircraft, trainers? Anything?
Well, I think, I mean, you're talking about the meeting that the Secretary of Defense will be attending here in the near future. That's really for them to talk about. We, right now, at this point, have not yet finished working through exactly what the training set needs to look like. So that's an ongoing process. So I think, well, I can't speak. I don't know what the Secretary will be asking when he gets there. I just don't know.
Well, I would imagine that his visit there is going to go off your recommendations, or at least what General McFarland wants to see there. I mean, are there areas in which you feel as though that the coalition is wanting?
Yeah. Again, so the answer to that question doesn't exist yet, right? We're still conducting that analysis. I mean, we've seen some things, right? We've already talked. You know, the Prime Minister of Iraq has come to us and said, hey, he would like to see more police get trained. So that's one thing that we know. Okay, we need more police training capability. But the rest of it is still. I mean, we're still deliberating. We're still analyzing. We're still going through that process of trying to determine exactly what we need.
Hey Steve, someone actually covered my question already, but I do have a question on the map. I don't know if you know which map is up now, but I think it was the first one you showed us. There's just little dots of this dark red that, nope, no, the other one. That one. I don't know, you probably can't see what we're seeing anyway.
Is it the one that shows where ISIL has
gained
and lost?
Yeah, exactly. The one where ISIS is what they've won and what they've lost. And you mentioned that it was from August of 2014. Yeah, that's the one. What are the dark red it says it's ISIL territorial gain. So that's territory they've gained since August of 2014. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, it is. So, and it's all territory that you're familiar with, right? I mean, Tadmor, Palmyra, a little piece of land up in the upper left-hand corner there, vicinity of the Mora line. That's about it.
What was the timeline on that? And then just one other question on the training. What is the number right now that are going through the pipeline? Like how many roughly in a week are fully trained ISF are you turning out, whether it's the basic 8 weeks or whether it's more advanced? What's the rough number?
It varies wildly, frankly. I think you know I got to get that number for you. We do have some of those numbers, but I'll tell you they just happen to vary significantly just based on what's going on. Over the last month or so, we've gotten about 900 police officers and roughly 2 brigades through training. So, but this was the most training that we've had. Most graduates that we've had in a month. But, you know, there's been weeks or months when it was significantly less. That has to do with everything from the operational tempo on the battlefield to what else is happening in Iraq if there's a pilgrimage or something going on that the forces are needed to provide security for. So there really isn't a clean line on that right now. But we've been very satisfied recently of this steady, you know, when we first started a year and change ago, it was definitely in fits and starts, right? We had a hard time getting enough troops, enough Iraqi troops to the training, and you know there was much discussion about throughput. Throughput's not an issue for us now. We are operating, maybe not at 100% capacity, but we're operating, you know, at full capacity. So yeah, we're satisfied with the throughput.
David Martin.
Are you going to have finished your work on how many trainers are needed and in time for Carter's meeting with defense ministers? And second, is the concept that operations in the Anbar corridor and operations to retake Mosul would be consecutive or simultaneous?
Yeah. So no, we probably will not finish before the Secretary's meeting. But it's an iterative process, right? It's continuous back and forth. We're always from here. We're always talking with Washington, and we're able to give them a sense for specifically, what direction they should push and where they should go. On simultaneous or sequential operations, that a lot of that is what the Iraqi army will decide. We've given them advice on how we believe that ought to go. I think we need to keep that one private because we sort of want to protect some of that information. I think the enemy's probably paying good attention to our intent. So we want to keep some of that to ourselves. Understand this, I think the most important thing is that our fundamental concept is to place simultaneous pressure on this enemy across the entire battlefield, the depth and the breadth of this battlefield. So that's our going-in principle, right? Keep pressure on this enemy all the time, everywhere, because that forces them to have to make very difficult decisions. So I'm not going to specifically talk about whether or not it's going to be a sequential or a simultaneous operation to take Mosul and to pressure the Anbar corridor. But what I'll tell you is our fundamental technique is this operationalization of the battlefield. So keep pressure across everything all the time.
Christina.
Hi, Steve. It's Christina. Back on the 10 brigades for the Mosul offensive, I think last week you said 2 would be Peshmerga. Would the rest be regular ISF? What would the rest look like? And how many of them received some training, and how many of them would, are not trained? How many Sunni tribal forces would be needed, and how many police? And how long does it take to get a brigade trained from scratch?
So it takes 8 weeks to get a brigade trained from scratch. The disposition of forces on the battlefield, so how many police, how many PESH, how many CTS, how many everything, these are all part of the plan that's in development by the government of Iraq. So the answer to your question doesn't exist yet. The government of Iraq is continuing the planning process. Analyzing the battlefield, analyzing the enemy situation, taking into account the expected degradation of the enemy based on our air strikes, etc., taking into account the advice that we give them based on the pressure that we're able to place on the enemy in Syria. Right? So all these factors have to come into play as the Iraqis kind of develop their scheme of maneuver on the ground. So there isn't an answer to your question yet. It's part of the plan.
Estimated 10 so far. I think you did say 2 would be Peshmerga, right? So then with the rest, what's the rest envisioned to be?
Yeah. So the rest will be, determined by the Iraqi government's decision process, right? So they haven't decided that yet. They're working with us. We're advising them. We're giving them some I think, good advice. But they haven't been able to determine it yet because they've got other factors that they have to worry about as well. So I think the Prime Minister of Iraq, along with the Chief of Defense, the Minister of Defense, and they're weighing all of the different factors that they have to weigh as the elected and appointed leadership of the country. So we just don't have a number for you.
Yeah, give some follow-up.
Yeah, Steve, you just mentioned the degradation of the enemy may be one factor in how many troops in Mosul. Is there a new estimate for how many ISIS are in Iraq and or Syria right now? Have the numbers changed?
I think they have, but I don't have the most updated numbers. I just didn't check on that one, Courtney. So the last set of numbers, we know are 19 to 30,000. It's my understanding that those numbers have begun that there's a new consolidated intelligence community estimate, but I don't have those numbers for you. But we'll research it and get it back to you.
Barbara.
A couple of different questions, Colonel Warren. On the 10 brigades, can I just clarify with you? I think previously you and others had mentioned 8 brigades. So is the 10 just now including Pesh and police, or has the top line number of brigades gone up?
It's an approximate number, right? So it hasn't gone up. It kind of continues to evolve over time. So you're right. We had a different number before, and we had a different number today, and there'll be a different number next week. So I really have to caution everyone that we are too early to really start putting numbers out because the numbers haven't been determined. And next week, as we continue analysis, it may change again. So we're trying to, develop what we believe will be a workable and resourceable and effective plan in conjunction with the Iraqis. So we're going to continue to iterate this. We're going to continue to chip away at this until something finally comes together. But we're simply not there yet. This is still January. This is going to be many months before we see actual operations for Mosul begin. So right now, our focus is let's start training some brigades. Let's start building some combat power. Let's continue to train some police and start building up some combat power while we simultaneously continue to iterate this plan and continue to iterate the scheme of maneuver, and while we simultaneously continue to degrade the enemy. So this is going to change. It's going to evolve. Nobody's ready to really slap the table yet and say, okay, this is it. We're moving out. It's simply too soon for that.
Follow-up questions, if I may then. On Raqqa, can you just illuminate a little bit more about what you are doing on missions in Raqqa, what you're doing and what the effect has been that you believe is on ISIS in Raqqa? Do you think that the Secretary's talked about getting ISIS out of Raqqa, maybe even this year. How feasible is it to really challenge ISIS in Raqqa given what is happening there? And then, so just illuminate Raqqa a little bit more. And my other question is, I wasn't sure I understood on the B-1s. So my apologies. Are you now saying that the B-1s either have left CENTCOM, are leaving CENTCOM? Is it a standard rotation? Will that capability even be replaced?
So on Raqqa, our focus on Raqqa really is to isolate through fires. So we are delivering precision fires in 2 ways. 1, against some of their high-value targets. 2, against some of the lines of communication, or the supply lines, also known as roads, that come and go out of Raqqa. So find a bridge, find a road junction, something like that, and strike it to degrade it. So that's what we're doing right now, is isolating Raqqa. Additionally, what you'll see, or what you've seen, is maneuver of friendly forces in the vicinity of Raqqa. One great example of that is the Tishreen Dam. Another great example of that is Al-Hal. So Tishreen Dam to the west, Al-Hal to the east. And as this enemy sees forces maneuver, the enemy has to then try to predict what's going to happen next and act accordingly. And by doing that, he exposes himself to our airstrikes. So that's kind of the sequence of events there in Raqqa. So it's a process right now of isolation and degradation. So we're trying to isolate them to make their lives harder, to make it more difficult for them to move things in and out of the city, and we're trying to degrade them, chip away at their strength and their combat power there. It is certainly feasible that Raqqa can be pressured or even assaulted in the next year. It's also feasible that it will take more than 1 year. So the enemy does get a vote. And we have to see how rapidly we can develop some of these partner forces, some of these moderate Syrian opposition forces that are in Syria. Obviously, we don't have the types of relationships there in Syria as we do here in Iraq. In Iraq, we have a standing army with an established chain of command, with training programs, etc. So we're able to, apply pressure a little bit more rapidly. In Syria, it's not quite as solid. On the B1s, standard rotation, we haven't made. I haven't made an announcement. I don't know, AFSET may have. But right, so it's just a standard rotation. We don't expect that we're going to lose any capability whatsoever. We've seen carrier groups come in. We're going to see other aircraft come in the near future. As we've seen other platforms rotate out of Turkey and other places. That's just part of the rotation. Also, the 82nd Airborne Division will be rotating out here in the coming weeks, but they'll be replaced by the 101st Division. So this is just how we have to do combat here, because we don't know when this operation will complete. We set all of our forces on a rotation schedule, so they come in, they operate for a while, and then they're relieved with fresh troops.
I don't think you heard that.
Oh.
They asked if you were going to rotate out.
So, yeah, I wish I knew. Jeff, tell me when I'm coming home.
Next, calling on Kim Dozier.
So along the lines of a couple of questions that have been asked about looking ahead to combat in Mosul, do you have a new estimate on what combat has left behind inside Ramadi? In terms of, the last we heard was 80% of the city was destroyed, but that was when coalition forces, Iraqi forces, had about 80% of the city under their control. So do you have a new estimate? Is electricity back on? Is water back on? Are you aware of how fast services are being restored to the population and how fast the population is returning?
Right. No, fair, good question. So first off, a lot of that is really underneath some of the humanitarian organizations. But here's what we do know. We do know that Governor Alway has a solid plan for first stabilizing. All right. So there's a two-phase operation: stabilization followed by reconstruction. So we're working now. The Iraqis are working now to get some generators in place. We believe that Al Tamim will have water functioning here within the next, coming weeks, I think, is probably about right. Their electricity is not really going too well yet, but we are working to get some generators moved in. And again, when I say we, in this case, it's the global coalition. U.S. military, coalition military doesn't really have anything to do with that. So no solid estimates on times for when electricity will be up, when water will be up, but we're seeing in bits and pieces a slow, steady, and hopeful return to normalcy. Generators beginning to move. Apparently the water infrastructure in the Tamim area was not too badly damaged, so it only needs some fairly low-level repairs to get that up and running. Much more damage in other parts of the city, so it will take longer. There have not been, to my knowledge, much in the way of returns yet. It's a little too early for that. The enemy has generally been pushed out, but the clearing or the reducing of the obstacles, the booby traps, the landmines, that process is ongoing. And it's going to be a slow process. And while we say we have pushed the enemy out, there's always the possibility that a sniper can infiltrate back in, that a suicide vest, a fighter wearing a suicide vest can infiltrate back in. So this enemy is kind of harassing the army as they try to clear these obstacles. And the reason that their enemy is conducting these harassing operations is because they want the army, they want to slow the army's ability to clear these obstacles, to keep them tied up in Ramadi longer. So, hopefully that answers your question mostly.
Just the follow, is there a new estimate on the amount of the city that's been destroyed? Is it 85 or 90% now that you have And is the area of ISIL control now down to 5 or 10%? Or are they totally into the hills around Ramadi?
Right. Yeah. So estimate of damages. So the UN hasn't come in and performed a formal estimate yet. The only estimate that we have is kind of what we've done based on overhead imagery, right? So it's different, you know, from overhead imagery can't tell you whether or not the water's working. Overhead imagery can't tell you whether or not the sewer system's working. Overhead imagery can't tell you whether or not the electricity's working. But that's what we have. So based on that overhead imagery, it does appear that about 80% of the city has been damaged in some way, shape, or form. But that's all we know. That is almost in a really not useful number, again, because we don't really have a sense of what the services are, and that's really important when you try to estimate a percentage of damage. That said, as the security situation stabilizes, we're hopeful that soon the UN's humanitarian folks can get in there and do a legitimate, real, no-kidding estimate of the amount of damage that's been done and what it's going to take to get it back up and running. Oh, ISIL, right. Where are they? So they've been, and we can pull up the, I don't know if you guys can pull up the Ramadi map again. So they're out of Ramadi. The enemy's been pushed out of the Ramadi city center area, and I'm looking at the map here. And where we see some enemy, of course, is up in the upper left, so the northwestern outskirts, maybe the ex-burbs of Ramadi, if you will, and the same thing to the upper right, the northeastern section. So those are kind of outside of Ramadi, but it is kind of they are kind of support zones for this enemy, and allows them to occasionally infiltrate, like I said, a single sniper, or two-man sniper team, or perhaps a suicide vest, in an effort to harass and slow down the progress that the Iraqi army is trying to make in stabilization and reducing the obstacles.
Hi, Colonel Warren. Quick different question. There may be an appetite to send more forces from here, from the U.S. to Iraq, and maybe some other assets from other nations and that sort of thing. We always hear about the kind of logistical challenges you guys have, capacity, no helicopters to get around, there's billeting issues and stuff. What kind of a challenge would adding more forces pose to you guys, and how fast could you respond to accommodate more troops?
Yeah. So the answer is it depends, right? So the logistical, you have to think of logistical infrastructure. I guess we'll use the same analogy again as a pipe, right? The logistical infrastructure is the diameter of the pipe and the number of forces that pipe can support, right? So at some point, so we're not at max yet. So given the existing infrastructure could support some number of more troops. I don't know the number. It's not a huge number, but it could support some additional troops. But then at some point, you do have to expand the size of the pipe. So you know these are matters that the logisticians spend a lot of time worrying about. I don't have the numbers with me, but you know if we needed to ramp up the size of the logistical footprint, and if the government of Iraq agreed to it, we could certainly do it relatively rapidly. No nation on earth has the logistical capability that the American Army has, frankly. You know, we like to say that, you know, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And logistics is really one of the American military's strongest suits. So if needed, we'll be able to expand logistical infrastructure. But right now, we've got enough logistical infrastructure to support what we have, plus a little bit more.
Quick, put a finer point on it, like, let's just say add 1,000 troops. Could you do it with the existing pipe?
Yeah, I have no idea, Gordon. We'd have to go ask the J4 about that.
Louis. Steve, a question about Operation Tidal Wave. You haven't given an update on that in a while. Has that operation ceased? Or are there other, has it evolved? And also, what is the situation with, I think you call them the Syrian Democratic Forces in the east? Have they made any territorial gains recently?
Yeah. So Operation Tidal Wave 2 continues. In fact, we recently had 3 or 4 airstrikes against gas and oil separation points north of Deir ez-Zor, so kind of in that region in between Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa. I haven't gotten any new statistics yet on number of oil barrels reduced or things like that. Those stats kind of come out, infrequently, and when they do, I'll certainly put them out to everyone. But Operation Tidal Wave 2 continues, as do our other operations to strike at other elements of ISIL's financial system. The most notable, of course, have been our strikes against banks, where we destroyed these piles of Daesh cash. Operations in the east. So the Syrian Arab Coalition, we call it the SAC, had been operating along the eastern sector there of Syria. They've seized Al-Hol, cleared several hundred square kilometers of territory. They have not yet seized Shadadi, but they've gone through several weeks of fairly tough fighting and are kind of in a reset process now.
Can I follow up? And what do you mean by the reset process? I mean, is that because they're realigning their forces, or what have they found tougher than expected opposition inside?
No, I mean, they made significant progress there. They made a lot of progress in a short period of time. Troops have to rest, right? And unfortunately for them, they're not like us, right? They can't rotate back to the States. They live there. So after a significant and tough fight, they need to be resupplied. They need to fix their weapons that have been broken. They need fresh boots. They need to do all the things that an army or a fighting force needs to do to bring itself back up to full strength to resume offensive operations.
Colonel Warren, how many more U.S. forces are needed to train the Iraqi military?
Lucas, we don't have a number yet. We're in a process of determining what that number is going to be, and that process involves discussions with the Iraqis to find out what they want, and it involves discussions amongst ourselves to determine what we think is necessary. So as that number is developed, we'll try to get it out to you, but right now there simply is no number.
In eastern Syria and the Deir ez-Zor area?
Lucas, can you ask that again? You got clipped there. The first half got clipped.
Reports of ISIS gaining territory in eastern Syria?
Yeah, so in the city of Deir ez-Zor, ISIL is battling regime forces. They recently, using the cover of a sandstorm, had success in a single neighborhood. Deir ez-Zor right now is split about 50% controlled by ISIL, about 50% controlled by regime forces. Over the last couple of weeks, ISIL was able to make some gains in the city of Deir ez-Zor, bumping them from 50% to maybe 56%. The regime gained some of it back when the weather cleared and they were able to bring some air power to bear. But that's about it. So nothing significant, not really a major tactical event, really small, localized, tactical events.
Can you talk about the impact Russian airstrikes are having in northwest Syria? It appears the regime is gaining ground against the Syrian opposition. Has the Russian airstrikes tipped the balance in the regime's favor overall in northwest Syria and overall in the conflict?
Yeah, the Russian airstrikes have made a difference for the regime. The Russian airstrikes have helped strengthen Bashar al-Assad, particularly in the Aleppo region. where Russian airstrikes have been probably most intense. And those Russian airstrikes have benefited the Assad regime and have allowed the Assad regime to push back both moderate Syrian opposition forces and, in some cases, ISIL. So everybody's in Aleppo. There's ISIL there, there's regime forces there, there's moderate opposition forces there. And over the past several months, Russian strikes have benefited the regime and hurt both ISIL and the moderate Syrian opposition forces.
And lastly here to Bill.
Thanks, Colonel Warren. First, on the ETF, we know that that is in place. Secretary Carter said that a couple weeks ago. Have they become operational yet? Have they started doing any operations? I know you're not going to be able to discuss everything they do, but can we say they're operational? And then secondly, on YPG, are they staying west of the Euphrates? I know that was a red line for the Turks. Thanks.
On the ETF, I can confirm that Secretary of Defense Carter did announce that they were present here. We're not going to discuss anything else about their operations. One of the things that gives these types of forces their security is secrecy, right? Secrecy is security for them. So I will only confirm that the Secretary of Defense did announce their presence in Iraq. On the YPG and the Euphrates River, the YPG has not crossed the Euphrates River, with one exception, and that's in and around the Tishreen Dam. And it's really the Syrian Arab Coalition, or Syrian, it's not the SAC that we know from the east, but it's other Syrian Arabs who are operating in and around the Tishreen Dam. I have secured a couple of pieces of high ground west of the Tishreen Dam to prevent the enemy from being able to bring indirect fires on the dam. And that was worked out ahead of time, and so everyone's satisfied with it.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve, for your time this morning, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.